So I noticed that most reviewers usually take about 1 to 2 weeks before they review a phone and then move on. So I wanted to give you insights based on my 6-month everyday usage so that you can make a decision to buy it long term. So I got my 15 Pro Max on the 2nd of October and I've been using it every day ever since. Gandhi would be proud. And there's lots to love about this phone except for 2 things. But first, let me give you some context. I upgraded from a XS, which was a 5.8-inch display, compared to this one, which is noticeably different with a 6.7-inch display. It also has 120Hz refresh rate that gives you the always-on display, and a peak brightness of 2000 nits. It's much more punchy and has vivid colors, so someone upgrading from a 13 Pro or later probably wouldn't be as enamored as I was. I really dig the adaptive refresh rate that just adapts according to your gaming usage or when you're watching HDR video, and how it just casually drops down to 1 Hz for always on display. Great stuff. So the thinner bezels were really noticeable in the beginning, but I have a case and the screen protector on, so it didn't really feel all that thin in the long run. And the reason they're so thin though is because of the frame. It's titanium instead of stainless steel. On one hand, I really love how it looks and feels, but on the other hand, it's, fragile and susceptible to damage because I have the looped titanium, which is just a painted on version of the real titanium. But it does look and feel premium, as a flagship phone should be, and no wonder S24 followed suit. It's lighter than most other flagship phones that I've tested, like the Pixel 8 Pro, and I feel is because of the weight distribution. That's because the camera island has been adjusted to make the 2 cameras line up, and the main 48 megapixel sensor takes great 24 megapixel photos with pixel binning and retains a lot of the detail. So the bigger file size is def worth it. The ultra-wide takes about 12 megapixel photos, and so does the telephoto, which is a bit of a disappointment. So in my day-to-day uses, I've actually used the telephoto and the ultra-wide lens quite often and gotten great shots. The telephoto does have some noticeable noise. It works for social media like Insta Stories and Twitter, but not to edit on Adobe or Final Cut Pro. The ProRes log file though does a lot to reduce a lot of the processing that iPhone tends to do, which gives away the telltale signs of being shot on a smartphone. But the log mode does eliminate most of it, and Apple itself was confident enough to shoot an event on iPhone 15 Pro. That should definitely tell you something, and in my opinion, it's great to shoot YouTube videos like I do, or shoot a birthday party, especially if you've got an SSD lying around and with the Type-C port. Speaking of which, it made my life a lot easier, as most of my other family members use Android, so I could charge on the go anytime. Or connect my mic that I'm using now, or an SSD. I know it's been on Android for ages, but this feels huge for a lifelong Apple user like me, thanks to the EU. My wife always used the Type-C cable that came with it, so I just bought an iPhone 14 Plus so she doesn't have to charge. Just like how I'd average about 11 to 11 hours 40 minutes on-screen time with social media, maps and other apps. But I noticed that if I use my battery wisely, I'd average about 36 hours of on-screen and off-screen time, which is great coming from a XS, but if you're coming from 14 Pro, it wouldn't really matter. There were a few concerns of overheating in the beginning, like everyone did, but I never had those issues myself, but it did get relatively warm at times when the room temperature wasn't right, or when I used my Mac charging brick to fast charge. It still charges slow compared to other flagship competitors, which is a bummer, but I like to charge my phone with my MacBook and then fast charge with my brick whenever necessary or when I'm traveling. That way I can extend my battery life, so it's not all that far behind from other flagship phones. It does lead the pack though in terms of performance, as it can sustain a workload much better than most phones and has a GPU capable enough to run PS4 level games like Death Stranding, Resident Evil 4. And as a gamer, I love the idea of just buying a console game on my mobile phone and then playing it whenever I'm bored or traveling or waiting in a line somewhere. Speaking of waiting, some of the better features promised were the stolen device protection, spatial video, and journaling. They're not must-have, but they're nice to have in case you need them, But for me, some of them were useful, but everything is not as perfect as it seems now, does it? And not everything was hunky-dory. I did encounter some bugs with HDR where it would just flash instead of being consistent, and the Face ID would just freeze once in a while in its place on the display. But they've been consistent with their updates that fix most of the bugs and security updates, especially when you've got so much overhead with the CPU and the chipset. Another feature that went over my head is the silent button. I rarely used it for anything other than silent. I did try it, but none of them were useful to me. But you might use it to open your Tesla's car door or something like that. Anyway, it really felt like the perfect time for me to upgrade from my 10s to the 15 Pro Max for the Type-C, titanium, 3 camera lenses, dynamic island, bigger screen, bigger battery, games with ray tracing, or the 120Hz display, which is really noticeable to me, but my wife thinks that's the same as her 14 Plus. There's just no convincing some people, is there? And as I said, there's two things I didn't quite love about this phone, which is the price, which is 1.6 times more expensive than United States, and the titanium frame, which is fragile and susceptible. On the other hand, it looks premium and feels great, but I don't want to break it and then spend another 50 grand on it. Anyway, I feel like this is a phone that most people won't like, but some people will really love. Let me know what you feel about the 15 Pro Max in the comment section below if you have one. And if you don't, would you consider buying one or avoiding it?